So here we are. Welcome to the glorious golden age of comics. It starts about 1940, but really it's a little earlier than that, as 1938 is when one of the greatest heroes ever sets the precedent for what we're about to experience, and it's the Man of Steel known as Superman. That's right. So I'll be reading out of this book that I made. I made all these notes, looking at all my history, just so you know what I'm looking at, looking down. Uh, Superheroes in general, this whole concept of the superhero, it's based on the personification of who we strive to be, like as people. Uh, they're notice that they're the best. That's what they stand for, just righteousness and goodness, everything wholesome. That's a superhero. That's what they're trying to be and stand for. It's Stan Lee says this famously. He goes, comics in general. There's a big fun thing about it. It's like it's an American art form. Something that's really American. Sort of like jazz, he says, and I love the way he says it. Sort of like jazz. So that's the thing about it's something that really does have its ties here. And obviously there are other forms of comics across the world, but superheroes and the way that we know comics today really did set quite a precedent for comics and comics in general and the comic book because manga is different. So we're talking about the comic books, the size of them, the way they were printed, the way they were made, the entire history of it, and a lot of it rides on the coattails or the capes of superheroes. So comics, that American art form, Superman is representative of the mighty man, like every mighty man. That's what they did, okay? And by they, it's Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. So Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, they believe that he's every man. Hercules, he's Samson, he's just all of these greats throughout history. He represents that. That's what they wanted him to represent when they created them. And one of them had a dream. That's what he had. He had a dream one night, runs to the other one's house and says, listen, I got to tell you about this. And they start creating Superman. So he tells them the idea and he starts drawing and he starts creating Superman. So that's what happens. And Superman, it really becomes like something else because, and let's talk about his design. So the design starts to happen where you have that big strong man, right? Because that's what was very popular. See, Siegel, or Joe Shuster, he was a bodybuilder. So he was very interested in bodybuilding. When you see old time stuff, people, the old YMCA, people used to just work out. It's a very different time. Television does not yet exist. So keep that in mind. The radio will impact Superman and lots of comic characters, but television doesn't exist. People did just work out. Go look at these old time folks sometimes, and just physical fitness was in style. So it's just interesting to watch that as a culture, but specifically bodybuilding and strongmen were very popular. Also, and I'll tell you about this because there's another reason I know all about that. This is what informed the costumes of these superheroes, much like it did for professional wrestling. Professional wrestling and all these big strong men wearing tights. Why? Because it all started with strong men in the circus doing that so that you can see their bodies and they're wearing their tights and doing their poses. And that's the idea. So strongmen informed the entire look of superheroes because superheroes are very, very much built, but then they get even into this different age where they talk about the roidial body. It's like steroid type of thing, where they really are these super non-humanly jacked things. But now, as honestly medicine and sports medicine has evolved, you actually see what pinnacle athletes can become. And that's why Arnold Schwarzenegger was as famous as he was. He thought about the way I talked about Alan Moore and the way he creates panels. Remember how I told you that? He writes a page of script for each panel in that book. Arnold Schwarzenegger really looked into what it was to build muscle, and he would work out all these different ways so that everything was equal. Everything. That's what his goal was, which is why he was Mr. Universe several times and then retires as Mr. Universe, right? There's a documentary about it. Lou Ferrigno, the Hulk, is in it. He's comes in second, the Incredible Hulk. The guy who plays the Incredible Hulk. But that's how focused he was, and that's why sometimes you look at bodybuilders and they're very oddly, grossly out of proportion. That's why Arnold Schwarzenegger stood out. It was this perfection. That is what superheroes were. They were the perfect version of that. Based on strong men, that's why they wear tights. The capes, just a little showmanship as well, probably. Probably also came from the circus. So that informed the costumes. And then another thing about it that gets tied into superheroes, what do superheroes do most? What do we know superheroes for doing most before they're saving the world? Right now it's the 40s. We haven't even imagined things that big. What are they doing? They're fighting crime, street level crime. But they fight crime. That's a lot of superheroes' goals. This is because Siegel's father, he died in a robbery. He died to robbery, a break-in into their house. So his father was killed. He was murdered, right? He had a visceral hate of crime in general. That's important. Think of that. That's almost, as I believe we all know, the origin of Spider-Man and Uncle Ben, right? Spider-Man loses his Uncle Ben because someone robs where again, it goes to wrestling. Spider-Man tries to be a wrestler when he gets his powers. This will come up in the Silver Age. And then, so he's trying to cash in on his powers. Someone robs the ticket office, runs past Spider-Man, who has all these great abilities. He goes, that's not my job, pal. He says, that's the cop. That's your job, pal. I gotta go. That same robber ends up fleeing the police and running around the neighborhoods, and Spider-Man goes home later on, all full of himself, and there's police there. Because that robber happened to pick his home, and he killed his uncle because he broke in, and his uncle tried to stop him. That's important. Isn't that crazy? And that's the origin of Spider-Man. That's a different company, different guy. That really happened. And it shows you what that did for superheroes and this idea of someone that really is just so anti-evil and just a villain and robberies and guns. Why is Superman bulletproof, right? He hates guns. Batman hates guns. It's very important that these little things, I don't know if it connects a dot for you, because sometimes people are like, oh yeah, because it is kind of right there in front of you. It's the same way that like a cigar, right? Then there's a cigarette. Oh, a cigarette. Yeah, you're right. It's the female version of a cigar, like dude and dudette. They used to say dudette. No, they didn't. No one said that. So that's what happens and infers the character. So you've got one guy likes weightlifting, bodybuilding, all that stuff. Another guy hates crime, all of that, really cares for just goodness and truth, justice, the American way, which becomes interesting, right? Because we're going to get to it. So comics, the size of comics have always been collected, right? They were all these comics that first start coming out, Action Comics. It is a comic book made up of many little comic stories. Oh, a 3-page thing about this, a 3-page thing about a cowboy, 3-page thing about the last son of Krypton, and then another page thing about, who knows, whatever. That's what it is, right? And then there's detective comics. Oh, a detective story about this, another type of detective. Oh, one of these detectives ends up being a man that sees a bat, right? That's how it happens. And then these characters go, oh, did you see that one? Did you see that character? Just like, think of it like Saturday Night Live, if that registers with you. Sometimes someone does a character and it catches on, right? So you got all these sketches, but that one rose to the top. He comes back, she comes back. That's how it works. So the cream rises to the top, as the Macho Man Randy Savage says.
The cream will rise to the top, oh yeah.
Okay, that's important because that is what sets the standard. Superheroes become the most popular version of syndicated comics. Comics and a comic book is invented because what they do is this. They take, I believe, Famous Funnies or Silly Symphonies is a cartoon, but I'll put it here, is the first comic book. It is a newspaper-sized thing, right? Newspaper comics were what? As big as Little Nemo, right? Little Nemo's that big newspaper poster. What do you do with that? You fold it in half and you fold it in half. That's how they got the size of a comic. And they took all these old comic strips they had and said, let's just redistribute them in these things, in these comic books. Boom, there they go. Now, we're out of old stuff. We need some new stuff. And people start creating just brand new stuff for comic books. So first it used to be based on reruns. Then we need new material. This is even how television networks start. We start and we play a bunch of old reruns, old comedy movies, and then we make one new show on AMC, The Walking Dead. Oh, and then we have enough money from that one show to make another show, Breaking Bad. And now we don't show old movies anymore. We're all original content. And that's what growing a brand and an industry is. So it's the same thing. Remember what I said in another video? Patterns. Look for patterns. These are all the same patterns. So this is why comics grow in this way. And the cream rises to the top.
Oh, yeah.
Newspaper folding and folding again is what makes the comics, right? I'll talk about comic strip celebrities. I touch on that a little bit when I talk about Winsor McCay. These people doing some of these comic strips, Chester Gould doing Dick Tracy, the gangster era of comic strip stuff, and other again, Winsor McCay, right? Some of these people wound up being pretty well-to-do. Bob Kane, who creates Batman, I'll get to him in a little bit, does very well, whereas Siegel and Schuster become a story that is a warning. So I'll tell you that because it's very important. It's very important for your creator rights. Notice how I bring that up several times in several videos. Your ownership and your creator rights, very important. And that lesson came from the two men that invented Superman, the one that started it all. They sold that for, I'm going to guess, I think it was was it even $1,100? 700, I'm going to put it here. This ridiculously low amount, right? So that's what they sold it to after shopping that idea around for 5 years. So they came up with that obviously in 1938, so -5, you do the math. They came up with it then, and then they're always just probably adding to it, coming up with new ideas with it. Oh, what if he did this? What if he did that? They didn't come up with it all at once, but by the time they were showing it to someone and it had been a while, it was fleshed out. They're like, you know what? You have something here. And we need some things, so we'll take it. And they paid him this. So now that company owns the rights. As we all know, if you get a job at Disney, they own the rights. If you get jobs at certain places, they own the rights to stuff you do off the book. You can't go home and draw on your sketchbook. That's theirs. Same thing with toy companies. That's theirs. When you work for them, your time there, if you create anything, they will try and prove, oh, when did you come up with that? It's real. So creator rights. They end up selling it off. And, it does work out. It's still a job. It still starts things off and gets things going. So let's talk about Superman. Let's talk about Superman as a man, right? And what he does. So he represents every mighty man, right? Hercules, Samson, heroes before him. That's what he represents. And he's basically created that way to be pure goodness, which he still is. He still is to this day. Superman he's the Boy Scout, right? You got the Dark Knight and you got the Boy Scout. That's the whole thing. They are polar opposites, and that is not by accident. It's by design. Because I'll tell you, you'll see. It happens obviously very naturally. Again, look for patterns. So we've got that they shopped him around for 5 years, but let's talk about Superman. He's strong, mighty man, blah, blah. He's an immigrant. That's what he is, right? Cast off from another planet, dying planet, right? He to be saved, sent to this other world, lands here, adopted family, right? Then he has to start brand new on American soil. This is very real. This is very real and not by accident. Immigrants had a huge, huge part of the comics industry and the creativity of it, especially Jewish creators, Italian creators, Hungarians. That's the New York area, take it from me. It's the melting pot. It's Ellis Island. Fleeing a nation to avoid strife. Again, I bring up strife. Fleeing a nation to have freedom is what the country's based on, right? We all want our religious freedoms, and that's how you get different colonies, different versions of that, and off we go. So people are still doing that all the way until whenever Ellis Island happening, right? There in the ports, people going out and getting signed right up to go to war. The way people are treating African American people right now, that's how the Irish were treated in New York for a while. This is what it is. You'll see, you can look up signs. Irish need not apply. No Irish, right? Racism is rampant because people are coming. Even remember, Ireland feuds with itself based on beliefs and borders. So that is a big part of what makes all of this. The melting pot in New York being the backdrop for a lot of superheroes. Even if Metropolis, right? It's a big city. Metropolis ends up representing essentially Chicago, more like California, Chicago-ish, a little meld of both, more Chicago. And Gotham City obviously is New York. And New York is even nicknamed Gotham City. That's what it is. And that's based on Gothic design. So Superman being like this thing about being an immigrant. Remember, he's still this big, tall, strapping white man, right? That's because how do you get these messages in? It's the same thing I was telling you about this lesson. Subtext. Okay? Subtext. Is that subtext is, I can't just make a gay character in 1940. I use subtext. I can't just make certain things the way right now because the rules of the world didn't apply the way. But how can I do it with subtext? This message got through to people. They saw what it was. It was in the script. It's in the stories. It's in the morals and the moral fiber of these characters, right? Because then it does come up. It does come up. But being wholeheartedly American is another thing. Remember, American pride is something that is rampant in this country in a very good way for a while. A lot of things in modern times, it's very different. And that all just goes right back to yellow journalism, and that's named after the yellow kid. And right now, that is unfortunately, because of the internet, it's the new flyers from a blimp. It's just what it is, right? They used to drop flyer. Oh, you heard this? I heard the buzz. That's the second the printed press is invented, printed lies are invented. That's what it is. And you can spread lies in a different way. And that's how things work. So we're going through another big bubble of trying to figure out how to deal with yellow journalism, okay? Because some people are out there to just muck it up, okay? So being that, and that he's an immigrant, and standing for all that is good and pure and all that, and the American way, and believing in freedom and what it stood for, the American dream, that was a real thing. If you can come here and just start anew and do it. And a lot of immigrants still very successfully do. A lot of immigrants own small businesses. That's why they're running those small businesses, because they own them. They own them. Okay, and that's important. It's important. The reason a lot of American kids have a tough time with all this nonsense is because of the culture we grew up in, all these things that we believe in. I think coolness being the one thing. You meet some other people from other countries, they're not hung up on certain things at all. And a lot of people can just do things by the book. This is the template for doing a thing, right? Gas stations are the number one, kind of open a business, close a business, though. You have to survive a certain amount of years. Laundromats as well. Delis, right? This is the thing. That model works. And if you just follow the model, you can have a successful thing. And that's why they're very family owned. And I'm very much also specifically speaking about New York and the New York area as well. Tucson, again, a little different, but the New York area, very much that. Because if you follow a template, you can open and own a small business. And that's important because that is freedom. You're always looking for, one, your own freedom to work, but two, land. Land is what everyone to this very day will always consider important. So when you own a home, I bought this land, I have my plot. It's important to people. It really is. It's what makes you, remember, you have to be a landowner to vote. Remember that back in the day, that old rule back in the day? The same time they had a rule where certain people only had a 3/5 vote. They were literally measuring people. That's how disgusting things are and were and will continue to be if you do not fight evil. That is just evil, right? Fact. So that is important. That's very important. The views that you're seeing today about American pride are so different because of what has occurred, because of the age, they call it the information age, right? It's also the disinformation age, isn't it? So it's important. Always realize that. Always realize that. You know, and click the headline, read the article, check the source, cite the source. People are out there to fool you, and they always have been. So the first thing that happens also with this immigrant, this man, this popularity, this superhero that does so well on his first adventure in Action Comics, I believe he thwarts a wife beater. He stops a woman from being falsely accused of murder, and like two other excellent, very heroic deeds. So just a real rich, full day for the debut of Superman, and just gets things done. Superman is a big seller, huge seller, right? What do? They decide it might be a good idea if we take this character and we put just his comic strips into one comic book. Unheard of. They did that. Superman's the first. That happens a couple years later. Unbelievable, and that changes everything going forward, doesn't it? Before that happens, though, I believe I just want to say a few things else. Let's talk about the business. All right. By the end of 1939, there were 7 firms creating comic books. 50 titles were on the shelf. 1 year later, 24 firms are around. So you got over 24, and 150 titles, 3 times the amount of superheroes are available. You can imagine the garbage that's out there. Are you a horror movie fan? Right? Lots of garbage, but also some real, that one's really a good one. Oh, that one was, and that one made that guy the director of Lord of the Rings, right? That is crazy. That's how it works. So when people get access to making their own stuff, a lot of stuff, you're going to get a lot of crap, right? And a lot of crap comes out. But if you sift through the crap, obviously the good stuff's there, and you got to do that. Again, that's why I like the cream rise top. It's a much better expression than visualizing sifting through crap. We don't want to do that at all.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not forget that there's still a little bit going on in the Marvel Universe. It has not existed yet as the Marvel Universe. It is a company called Timely Comics. So Timely creates a comic book called Marvel Comics. And then later that brand gets bought or just collapsed into it. I'll explain it when we get to the Silver Age. But they did create the first anti-hero being Namor the Submariner. So he is one of the very first heroes of the Golden Age that Marvel has via Timely. He is also joined by the Human Torch, but it is not Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four. It is a robot that is the Human Torch. So it's some sort of robot android that turns a flame, and the way they draw those flames, very old-fashioned. Go Google it if I don't have time to throw something here for it. Right? And then I believe Vision is another one. And those are the first kind of three Marvel characters that really show up in an early form. And again, Namor being the very first kind of, I don't walk the very line of just I'm a super good guy. And that's important, as I just went on such a tear about goodness and superheroes. So we've got Fox Comics. We've got they are a terrible comics company. If you worked at Fox Comics, it's just an aside, a joke I saw in a video where they created the Blue Beetle, who we know. The Blue Beetle ends up getting bought by another comics company, Charlton Comics, and then Charlton Comics gets bought up by DC Comics, and then the Charlton Comics are what the Watchmen is based on. He was going to use the Charlton Comics and murder those characters, use those characters. Instead, they didn't want to only just bought these characters. We'd like to maybe use them. Blue Beetle is around this day, and all of those characters still hopping around. So he created tropes of those characters, archetypes of those characters, and that's they did Rorschach and instead of the Question. Okay, if you're familiar with the Question from DC Comics. So Owlman, right, shows up. So there's all their little different characters, and that's what he did. So they didn't kill these characters 2 companies ago. Why did Fox Comics create the Blue Beetle? Someone asked him, and the guy goes, he says, I have 2 words, Green Hornet. So Green Hornet, very popular comic. So we got to rip that up. We got the Blue Beetle. So there you have it. It's the same way that, the Monkees, if it's a band from the 60s, right? The Beatles became crazy. And then what do you think happened because of Beatlemania? You got some of these other British bands, but also it's the fleas and it's the ticks and it's the mosquitoes and it's the whatever, because the Beatles worked. The Beatles, you don't think about their name. The Beatles, right? The bugs, they're bugs. What? I'm confused. Nope. That's what it is. And it spawns a bunch of copycats and people that even parroted the Monkees. But then the Monkees become actually pretty successful. I love me the Monkees. So we got lots of, as I was saying, we've got all those characters, all those creators, and lots of Jewish creators. Okay, lots of Italians, lots of Hungarians, lots of Irish, all New Yorkers. And this is also why, when you think of this is again just a thing that's a little fact. This is why comics are so associated with water towers. So all these buildings have these great big water towers on top, the pointed thing in a cylinder, right? They're not like everywhere. But they were like outside of the buildings of the Marvel offices that point in some of these comics offices. So, these buildings, right? So all of a sudden these water towers are just everywhere. It just shows you how your environment just dictates exactly what happens and then becomes just a comic standard, are those water towers. Here's the whole thing. There's a guy named Stanley Lieber, right? Comics still looked at in a way as, well, that's kid stuff or that's this. That's low art. Does it ever change? Okay. So because Stanley Lieber said, one day I'm going to want to write the great American novel, so I better use a pseudonym. How's about I just use Stan Lee? And that's where Stan Lee comes from. His name is Stanley Lieber. All right. So he was protecting his identity because one day he's going to write something great. I think you did a good job. All right. So that's really like fascinating and really fun. That's a big part of the Superman and the Golden Age going to Superman. Let me check where I'm at here. And yeah, I'll leave that there. We'll call that one. That's 25 minutes on the Man of Steel. I got Batman coming up next and then Shazam. And I think this lady, right? Got a little Wonder Woman in our lives. So that's the next video. I'm having a great time.